for you has arrived.
Excellent. That must be my body shaper.
What is a body shaper, Master?
Oh, it's a modern object that humans use to reduce their belly.
I'm happy that you are thinking about improving your image, Master. But I'm happier to know that our economic situation is getting better. Perhaps you can buy me a new mattress. The one I have already has the wires coming out.
What are you talking about? We don't have money. We still have to pay the bills. And until we settle that, forget about the new mattress.
You are a bit miserable, Master.
Yes, the truth is that I am. Good evening, my friends, and welcome to the Loop of Horror. I'm Count Dracula. Tonight, we will show to you a couple of creepypastas of real facts that I am sure will make your skin crawl. Enjoy your macabre and filthy ravings, just as I enjoyed spending Igor's salary online. It's too easy to buy anything nowadays. Humans are so interesting that I even feel guilty when I eat one of them.
Before we begin, we remind you that we upload new and monstrous videos every Tuesday night. If you like this type of content, subscribe and activate the bell so you can get caught in this loop of horror.
I started working at Jacksonville State Hospital in 1950. I had worked at other mental hospitals before and had seen it all, or at least that's what I thought until I met her. Eugenia was a 60-year-old woman who apparently had nothing. She was acting normal. Her mind was lucid and refreshing. Having conversations with her was nice. But it didn't take long for me to realize her real problem. She couldn't sleep at night. She barely managed to close her eyes at intervals for 1 or 2 hours. That was her nightly routine. She sobbed at times, and sometimes I saw how she covered her ears. We couldn't even get her to sleep with the strongest medications we had available at the time. When the first rays of sun entered the window, a deep relief came to her. She began to smile and chat with everyone who wanted to talk with her. Now, I was a research psychiatrist, and I really wanted to find a way to help her, but to do that, I needed to understand her problem. One day, I asked her to tell me the reasons why she was in that place. She, at first, refused. For several days, she hides from me to avoid talking about it, until, suddenly, one day, she invited me to sit in a chair near the window of her room, while she was sitting at the edge of her bed.
I live with my parents and my 2 brothers, Roger and Samuel, in a house on the outskirts of the city, in the cornfields. That's what we were dedicated to. I was 10 years old. I was the oldest of my brothers. One afternoon, we were playing near the cornfield after working all morning. It was harvest season. We played while we waited for dinner to be ready. The sun was already setting. We only saw the last red and orange reflections of the light. In a few minutes, night fell, and suddenly we began to hear the cornfields moving. as if someone was walking among them. We all turned our eyes towards the source of the sound, and in the distance we saw the silhouette of a man. We thought, surely it's Daddy, that he was on his way back from putting away the harvest corn in the barn. Very happy, we began to run towards him, brushing aside the cornfields that were already 2 meters long. It was then that I came to my senses. The waist, the chest, and the head of that silhouette stood out from the cornfield, which measured 2 meters. How was that possible? The dimensions of that silhouette were more noticeable the closer it got. Also, the barn was to the north of the house, and this man was coming from the south.
Stop! That's not Dad! Run!
We all ran without stopping until we got out of the cornfield, but the silhouette was already very close. In an instant, it had also left the cornfields, even though it seems to be moving slowly. In a panic, I could see that his feet were floating. He was a giant, skinny, stout man wearing torn white clothes. The moonlight revealed his features. His face seemed to be emaciated. It's as if he had been dead for a long time. His eyes were covered with an old bandage wrapped around his head, and his teeth were long and sharp, like the fangs of a crocodile. I saw with horror that he was going after the youngest of my brothers, Samuel, who couldn't run that fast. So I gathered courage and stood between that thing and my brother to give them time to run away. The man of the cornfield kept coming closer until he was right in front of me. Not knowing what the entity was going to do to me, I was filled with chills and my legs began to shake, so much that I urinated at that moment. He hunched his body to bring his hideous face closer to me, and when I felt his icy breath on my ear, I closed my eyes and began to cry, expecting the worst. The man of the cornfield said something to me that I've never forgotten, and then he started to float back as he laughed. He floated back just as he had come, but without turning his back on me. I don't know how long I was there, perplexed, until my parents came for me. Little by little, my brothers forgot what happened and got over the trauma, but I was worse with the days. I started with nightmares, anxiety, night terror, until one day I couldn't sleep anymore. I haven't had a peaceful night since. My parents put me here, and honestly, I feel safer in this place. I didn't want to step foot in that cornfield ever again, although being here has not saved me.
Eugenia, what did the man tell you?
I asked. She only smiled sadly, and she told me,
For half a century, you will see me at night. You will hear me.
You will see me, and you will suffer the hell in which I have been trapped. You will tell my name to the first person who asks you about this day. only after 50 years have passed. When you finally pronounce my name, you will die, but you will be free from me. If you disobey me and tell anyone my name before half of a century is up, I will drag Sammy with me to hell.
My dear doctor, today marks 50 years. The name of the cornfield man, it's Philippe Francois Renault.
What Eugenia had just told me was incredible. I began to assume different mental disorders that she could suffer from. After our conversation and before I could say goodbye to go process what she had just told me, Eugenia smiled, thanked me for listening to her, lay down on the bed, and slept for the rest of the day, all night, and the next day, when we noticed that she wasn't waking up, we went to check on her, and she had already passed away. Her continuance was one of indescribable inner peace. What that man told her had been fulfilled. I understood her reasons for not telling me her story before. She waited for the exact day. I began to do extensive research on that name and found that the cornfield man had been a slaver. The worst thing is that after investigating official and unofficial documents, I found that Eugenia belonged to a bastard bloodline of Mr. Renault. I consider myself skeptical of these things. I have tried to justify Eugenia's case with science, but what I can't explain is the fact that she predicted her own death. Despite my efforts not to believe this story, the idea that Eugenia, to probably free her ancestor's soul, had to pay with a life enslaved to pain for 50 years does not stop haunting in my head.
The following story is a suicide letter, possibly from a psychotic man, or from a man deeply disturbed by something sinister that does not belong to this world. In the end, you will judge and decide. The letter says the following.
Anne, do not enter the house. I ask you not to. Please stay here at the entrance. Read this letter before you do anything. I ask you to forgive me, my love. God knows that you're the love of my life and that you were the best thing that could have happened to me. When you finish reading this letter, you will hate me. You will wish you had never met me. And that hurts, but I know this pain is not as great as what I am causing you now. It saddens me to think that I will go down in history as a criminal psychopath. But I want you to understand that this is a price I am willing to pay because what I did was necessary. You may not understand how I was able to do something like this to our own son, but that is why I want to explain to you what happened. You know that I was always someone regular when you met me. I was someone very shy and insecure, but I still managed to get you to notice me. We spent so many happy moments together. The day you agreed to marry me was the happiest day of my life. Then our Charlie was born, and it was the most beautiful thing that could have happened to me. The first 12 months were perfect with the two of you. No matter how hard I worked, I didn't care because you two inspired me to be better for you. However, everything changed shortly after Charlie turned 1 year old. One of those nights when you go out to see your friends, and I stayed to take care of our son. I remember when he fell asleep, I put him in his crib, turned on the light, and went down to the living room to watch television while I waited for you. Suddenly, I started to hear Charlie cry. It was not a common cry. It sounded desperate, and I ran to the room to see what was happening. I took Charlie in my arms, and while I cooed to him with a tender voice, I asked him, "What do you have, my love? Why are you crying?" That's when it happened for the first time. It was difficult to describe this. Charlie answered me. Now, I know it's hard to believe, but I swear he answered. However, it wasn't his voice. It was his lips moving, but it was as if hundreds of people were talking at the same time.
I have nothing, you fat face!
I stood there, petrified, trying to process what had just happened, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation as my heart raced, my skin crawled, and my icy hands trembled. I didn't even yell, and I don't know what happened afterwards, nor do I remember how I got to the garden of the house to smoke. Then you came and asked me why I was out. I wanted to tell you, I swear I did, but I felt so hopeless because I knew you weren't going to believe me. I told you that I had gone out to smoke and that Charlie was in his crib. I lied to you even though I didn't know where he was and I wouldn't know what you would find when you opened the door. I was so scared that I wanted to stay outside, but my fear that something would happen to you was stronger, and I decided to go with you. The house was quiet. We went up to the boys' room, and Charlie was sound asleep, as if nothing had happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was so afraid that the baby was going to cry and that I would have to go check on him. But I was more terrified that you would go to see him and that something like what happened to me would happen to you. For a while, things were normal. I realized that when the three of us were together, nothing happened. I tried to always have the three of us together, but obviously that was impossible. We both had to work, and one of us would be alone with the baby eventually. I decided to take my vacation to be with him. I thought that if something happened, it was better that it happened to me instead of you. I wanted to think it was a bad dream, a hallucination maybe. I tried to explain it in every possible way. I thought about going to see a psychologist, but I was afraid that they would think I was crazy. I was afraid of ruining things at work, of ruining my family. One of the afternoons when you went shopping with your mother, I was sitting in the garden, alone and smoking. I didn't want to be alone with Charlie. I planned to stay there until you got here, and then lie to you like the last time, telling you that I had just left. But when I was about to finish my second cigarette, I began to hear some terrifying screams coming from the house. And they weren't human, they were the screams of Gummy, our cat. It was obvious that he was suffering. The screams from him were terrible. The fear that I had been hiding for weeks surfaced. I ran inside the house to see what was happening. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, and Gummy's screams stopped being heard. Even so, I eventually climbed the steps and walked until I reached the boy's room. Upon opening the gate, I was met with a horrifying scene. The walls were splattered with blood, and on the floor, Charlie was sitting in a pool of blood with the decapitated carcass of the cat in front of him. In his hands, he had the cat's head, and he was tossing it in the air and catching it like as if it was a ball. Suddenly, he became aware of my presence, turned to stare at me, and outlined a macabre smile. He showed me the cat's head again, and in that hideous voice, he asked me,
How much do you think Mommy scream if I rip her head off?
I couldn't stand it anymore. I began to cry from the terror and helplessness that I felt. The boy stood up awkwardly as he laughed wickedly. With a smile, he told me,
Why are you crying your fuck face? You are a disgusting vermin.
He laughed again and began to approach me slowly. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run away, but my legs wouldn't move. Suddenly, I heard someone come up the stairs, and it was you.
Is everything all right?
You asked me with a very normal voice. I turned my face and was surprised that you didn't say anything because of the mess in the room. When I turned my face back into the room, everything was normal. There was no blood, and Charlie was in his crib.
What happened, dear? Is everything all right? Why are you crying? You're very pale.
I told you that I cried because I love you both so much and that I was very happy. You smiled sweetly and told me I was silly. You took me by the hand and led me to the living room to show me some things that you had bought for me. That day, I understood that what was inside our son was playing with me. He enjoyed making me suffer. I was his entertainment, his damn pet. The following days, things happened that I tried to hide from you. I told you that Gummy had escaped when you asked me about the cat. Also, that I had thrown away your favorite curtains because they were very old and you were very upset. But for me, it was better than telling you that our son burned them while he was trying to start a fire. I spent 2 weeks trying to protect you, to hide what was happening in that house, which, by the way, had gotten worse. Every day, Charlie tormented me, made fun of me, and did terrible things around the house. My love, I know I'm not crazy. I know I didn't imagine these things. I'm sure of that because neither the cat nor your curtains nor many other things are in the house. You know I don't drink alcohol, that I don't use drugs, that there's no history of mental disorders in my family. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do because after all, that was our son. I was afraid that one night he would finally kill me, and then he would start tormenting you. So I thought of a solution. If I couldn't do anything to get that thing out of our son, then I had to put Charlie down. I knew that no one would believe me. Not you, nor the police, not some religious fanatic would be able to digest a story like this. I knew I was alone. I took courage when I thought it was very likely that Charlie was being tormented by that thing inside of him. It was my duty to free him. I knew you would leave early, so I planned everything yesterday. I took an old axe out of the basement and hid it behind the kitchen shelf. I didn't sleep, thinking about what I had to do that next day would be the end for our son and me. When you left this morning, I started to hear little footsteps coming down the stairs. I walked to the kitchen and took the axe and went back to the living room. And there he was, with a lighter in his hand and that macabre smile on his face. He stared at me and said,
Hello, Daddy. You want to play with me?
I said nothing. I just walked slowly towards him with an axe in my hand. I saw in his eyes that he was surprised, probably because I didn't show him any fear. He stopped smiling and insisted,
Play with me, Dad. Let's play burn down the fucking house.
I was filled with terror, but I didn't show it. I kept getting closer as he stared at me. When I was in front of him, he raised his face to look at me and said,
Why aren't you crying today, you fucking coward?
I raised the axe and brought it down towards him, slashing across his shoulder. He started screaming in that demonic voice and scrambled to hide behind the couch. Suddenly, the voice of a crying baby came out, and so I got scared. I dropped the axe and went to pick Charlie up. He was bleeding. I hugged him tightly. I had hoped that thing would have been scared, that he would have understood that I was no longer afraid of it, and that he would have vanished. Forgive me, my love.
I already knew you were a fucking crybaby.
He bit my neck with teeth I know our son didn't have. Desperate and terrified, I struggled to pull it off me and flung it to the ground. I took the axe and buried it in his chest. I heard Charlie's crying, but I also heard that demonic voice saying,
You're a dumbass. You're not hurting me. You're killing your son.
I kept pounding on his chest while the thing taunted me, saying that I couldn't hurt him, but that I was causing unbearable pain to my son. I was hysterical. I wanted it to end, but it had no end. So I decapitated him, and only then did it stop. I can't live with this end. I can't live with the fact that I had to kill my own son. Therefore, I ask you to forgive me and to understand why I had to do what I am about to do. Please tell my parents that I love them and that I hope they forgive me. I love you forever, Charles.
Like this video to prevent the night beast from bothering and visiting you. And subscribe, activate the bell for creepier and twisted content brought from the bowels of the beyond. Remember that you can find unique content, information about our next videos, bases for our bizarre contest, and much more on our social media found in the description. Do not hesitate and let yourself be caught by our loop of horror.
Last but not least, sometimes the human mind can play cruel tricks on you. But don't trust yourself. That strange shadow you see in your room might not be a strange projection of some object.